Virtually every constitution in every country around the world recognizes that every person is equal in the eyes of the law. But in Sri Lanka, there continues to be a privileged class of people to whom the law rarely applies. Good evening and welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Eliathambi to discuss these anomalies in the application of laws and in fact some of these rather strange laws that we seem to continue to have. We have with us this evening Mr. Hejaaz Hizbullah, attorney at law, well known for all his legal and rights activities. Good evening, Hejaaz.
Good evening, Niresh. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, Hejaaz, let's get down to the crux of the matter. Hate speech. Now, in Sri Lanka, there are some people who, when they say the slightest thing, the law jumps all over them. And they are arrested as though they had tried to murder the Queen. But then there are others to whom the law doesn't apply. They can say whatever they want to incite people to basically trash talk various communities, religions, races, other nationalities, and nothing much seems to happen. Now, Hejaaz, why is this? Why do we have such a huge issue in applying the law equally?
That's a tough question, Niresh, and I think this is a problem that pervades our country and our society all along, and we've struggled as a society to apply the law equally for a very long time. And now let's look at the concept of hate speech and how hate speech prosecutions have happened in this country. Now, hate speech generally is targeted at a particular group. So you will have, since 2012, we had certain British clergy, not all of them, a certain small group of them, targeting the Muslim minority, and they had a complete free hand. Police complaints were lodged. Sometimes 50, 60 police complaints are lodged. No action taken. The law does not apply to them. The police do not question them. No statements recorded. The PTA does not apply to them. The ICCPR does not apply to them. That is one category. Then we also had another category of non-clergy but politically favored groups who also made certain also equally nasty, hateful, insightful, derogatory comments, and the law does not apply to them. But on the other hand, you have journalists, comedians, members of the minority, poets who, in the case of the poet, he had actually not said anything that he's accused of, but I mean, you had who actually make an innocent statement or something extremely minor, for whom then face the full brunt of the law. And these hate speech prosecutions and these ICCPR laws and PTA has been used, because PTA also has a hate speech component, to target journalists and activists and politicians like Azad Sali. So that's the problem. So there are prosecutions, but on the other hand, we have people who are, I mean, you lived in this country since 2012, you know the whole halal problem and the amount of hate, the Aludgama issue and the Digan and all those are, before all those riots happened, there was a lot of hate speech, and on Facebook and on COVID, you saw the hate speech. But what happened? Nothing happened. So we have a serious problem, and that's, I think, to do with the fact that we are badly divided ethnically and on terms of ethnicity and political.
But Hejaaz, is that actually correct? Are we as Sri Lankans actually divided, or is it that politicians continue to try to divide us, and we fall prey to that.
I would subscribe to the latter view, that this is something that is being foisted on us. And unfortunately, there are enough willing participants and supporters, but that's also human nature. So these things are being exploited, and so that's the problem we have with hate speech. And also now recently, I think, I'm sure you know this, a Buddhist monk was convicted for a particular statement that he had made, but then again he was not prosecuted. He was prosecuted under the penal code for a statement made in 2016. The conviction came in 2024, 8 years later. But the damage that those statements made in society remained, and the law never got active against him. And what is also disappointing is that even after conviction, he was portrayed in the media, certain media channels, as like a hero who's been sacrificed, and who's in a way trying to justify what he said.
Now, behind such individuals and groups, there is always a political, a party, a group, and there's always ulterior motives. It is not simply that that person or that group actually feels that way about a minority, or about another country or whoever. It is simply that they want to create trouble, they want to create division, they want to distract the people, they want to win elections. I mean, isn't this the crux of the matter? It's actually all about power and, of course, money.
Precisely. And when you have people winning elections on hate speech and by dividing us, they automatically end up being bad administrators and forming very bad governments. I think the last 2-3 years and the brunt of the economic hardship that we are facing, the cost of living, and the VAT and the taxation issues and all that, the dollar, all of those issues are results of bad governments that got elected on the basis of hatred, that did not win on good sound economic policies, on sound management of the economy, but they were voted in on the basis of hate and fear and anger towards some other community or group, and they ended up messing the country up for everybody.
So, I mean,
which is precisely why we need to work against hate speech. Exactly. It completely ruins our country.
Exactly. But at the same time, there's no point having laws in the books if they are not applied, and if they are not applied equally without political favor. And this is where I'm rather puzzled, because we know that the police are politicized. They've always been. Even successive IGPs have admitted to this, that the police are politicized. OICs of police stations are appointed by politicians, rather than going through the usual process in the police. So, of course, we hope this situation will ease up. But now, leave the police aside. I mean, you can always get the police to, if you are in power, you can get them to arrest somebody, unfortunately. But what about the Attorney General's department? I just don't hear of the AG's department lawyers standing up and telling the politicians, no, you can't do this. You can't charge somebody for something under the PTA or the ICCPR because that person clearly, on the evidence, hasn't committed this. And at the same time, we don't see the AG's department saying this person should be charged under the ICCPR because there is evidence on this. So, who's making the decision in the end?
I think there has been the role of the Attorney General. The Attorney General is a judge before a judge before you actually are produced before a judge.
Yes,
So
because they have to consider the
yeah.
evidence and then decide whether to charge or not, and under which law that a person is to be charged.
Yeah. So in as lawyers we call it, they play a quasi judicial role. The Attorney General historically played that role as the lawyer for the republic, for the country.
Exactly, for the republic and the country,
for a republic
not
and for
for
the
a
country.
party in power.
Unfortunately, I would say since the 1970s, after the constitution, the executive presidency, etc., there has been a gradual decline or confusion in the Attorney General's department and in the role of the Attorney General in that role. Are we the lawyers for the republic, or are we lawyers for the government? Are we advising the president, the statesman who's leading the country, or are we advising the president who's the politician? So that those roles have been confused to the extent that I think at the last general election, both the NPP and the SJB, the two front runners, and even in the presidential elections, I clearly saw in both manifestos, presidential manifestos of both those two candidates, of a reform to the Attorney General's department, of dividing those two roles up, particularly the role of prosecuting and also role of the other functions that they play. So that the prosecution function will be taken out of the Attorney General's department and maybe given to another director of public prosecutions, or so on and so forth. That then they will be more independent in their decision making with regard to prosecutions, and then with regard to actions filed against the state, advising the state on looking at matters of policy, etc., that there'll be maybe the Attorney General or whatever the department will be looking after into that, so that those roles are kept separate. Here what happens is the one who defends a police officer in a fundamental rights application is the one who's advising the state on prosecuting maybe the petitioner on a complaint made by that particular police officer against whom the petitioner has filed a fundamental. So there is he's got himself utterly confused as to what his roles are.
But now, how do other countries do this, Hejaaz? Because there are 193 member states in the United Nations. We are not alone. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, which of course our governments always seem to try to do. Whenever there's an issue, we don't look at the precedent set by other countries. Whether it is with technology or whatever, we simply appoint some committee with a lot of people in that committee, sometimes a parliamentary committee, and we try to come up with our own ideas when actually many countries have already figured it out, and there are systems which we can choose from and we can go ahead. So, this is so in every sphere. Whether you are talking industry, agriculture, digitalization, which is one of the big areas that this government is focused on, but also in terms of the law. There are countries which are, they're far ahead. Their legal systems are much more developed than ours. And so why aren't we looking at what they have done rather than trying to figure things out and creating another mess here?
I think there's enough examples across the world for us to follow, and I think in every manifesto we see those examples. So they've looked at somebody and they've seen that okay, that's there and that's put on paper. The problem is, or the gap is, in implementation. So if you take the United Kingdom, the Crown Prosecution Service is an independent body, and the Attorney General is an entirely different body who who is also a politician actually, because he's advising the government on those matters. So he actually is the government's lawyer, where the prosecution part of it and appearing for the state is done by the Crown Prosecution Service. So there is plenty of examples for us to take from. But what is always lacking in most of the issues in our country is the political will, and also enough public pressure to make those changes. And that public pressure, now for example, I mean, let's talk about the PTA. PTA was in the Sri Lankan law books, was used and abused for 40 odd years until it started. They started using it on non-Tamil individuals. When the PTA came out of the north and east and started being applied in the south, then there is awareness. So that awareness must come, and once that awareness and activism and voice from the south starts, when the people in the south start talking about issues, especially on matters of rule of law, etc., then we will start seeing changes. The problem about inequality, the problem with the unequal application of the law, is that the people in the south, particularly the majority community, does not really see it or feel it.
But I mean, I disagree in a way, Hejaaz, because if you, I mean, okay, even in the south, in a majority community area, if an average person, a normal person, goes to a police station, you know how they are treated. But, you know, in fact, one of my friends in the police once told me, don't ever go into a police station without first calling the SP or the DIG of the area. So this is the situation where, you know, police stations are basically not nice places for anyone. And especially if you go with a complaint, the police look at who is the complaint against, and then they decide what they are going to do. So it's not about the complainant or the alleged crime or offense. It is about the perpetrator. So if the perpetrator is some minister's cousin, hands off. You know, so this kind of thing, I think it crosses all boundaries, but due to, of course, the
degrees vary.
The degrees vary.
Yes.
Because it has been, you know, PTA particularly has been applied on the minorities much more, especially in the northeast. You can say it was because of the wartime conditions, but you can argue that point. But this is something which is endemic, isn't it?
Yes, I would agree. I think my earlier comment, what I'm talking also is the fact that some of the degree, the you really feel it pretty badly, especially if you look at all the abuse of the law from the north and east, the disappearance and all that. Much, of course, of the recent years, the north and east has seen a lot of that more than things. But you're correct that we need to come as a country as a whole. Needs to come to a realization. I think they have come, but and also start talking about for these laws to be changed. And the problem with that now, if you talk about the PTA, nobody thinks that okay, it's going to be used against me. If you take the ICCPR, nobody thinks that it will be used against me. I'm not the target group. The PTA, I'm not the target. I don't belong to the target group. So then it's not an issue for me. Right, but what they do also need to realize is that although I'm not in the target group, it's being used in a way to manipulate and to manipulate public discourse and discussion in our country, stifle voices, suppress people, which in the long run is going to hurt me. And the Aragalia was a good example of that.
Oh, absolutely, because once the whole country started protesting about the government and its actions and inactions, suddenly the entire population was in the wrong. So, then of course it could have been PTA or whatever could have been used against, it was a case of, are you going to lock up 1 million people or 2 million people? So it was simply sheer numbers that prevailed in the end. Because as long as it was just a few protesters, then the government was not phased and could apply whatever draconian laws that they wanted to. So now when you speak of public opinion, public pressure, that's a bit of a dicey thing, isn't it? Because when there is an election, even 6 months away, then politicians tend to be more receptive about what people are saying. But when there's no election in sight, politicians generally don't care about what even their own supporters are saying. So this is sort of a big issue here, isn't it, in Sri Lanka? Now, in many other countries like the US, you have elections much more frequently. So public opinion is heard. But here in Sri Lanka, we have this issue.
Yes, that certainly is a problem, and I think one of the solutions that have been put forward is this right to recall, where you're able to have a vote to recall an elected representative.
Which is so in many democracies, including the United States. You simply need to have a certain number of signatures on a petition, and then the elections commission or department has to actually have a recall election to see whether that person would actually be elected again.
Yeah. So that's one thing that we can look at. But in addition to that, we also need we also need other civil society institutions, the media, the police commission, the public service commission, etc., to start also upholding value. So that is why those institutions, appointments to those institutions are important. Now, recently the Supreme Court delivered a judgment where I think a fundamental rights application or writ application was filed against the Constitutional Council. And when you read the judgment, quite apart from what the judgment says, you also see the very positive contribution that the Constitutional Council has been making, and how they have been discussing matters, even with regard to the appointment of the IGP. So we need those institutions also, not just the people on the road shouting and voting at election, but we also need other bodies also working on it. Now, the IGP I'm talking of, and I know the appointment that I'm talking of, and how the appointment did not, there was a block on the appointment because people were conscious, the members of the Constitutional Council were conscious enough to not allow for that to happen. So that kind of public pressure is also important.
Absolutely. But then now let's look at the role of the media. In Sri Lanka, the media, whenever it raises an issue, Hejaaz, we tend to stand out. And then we are the target of attacks as well, in whatever form, whether it is physical or just,
studio set on fire.
Yeah. That is an extreme situation. But then the threats and the various pressures. But the reason that the media comes to the forefront is because the other institutions are not standing up. Like I said, if the Attorney General's department nips some of these issues in the bud, it wouldn't end up on this program, would it? Because it's been taken care of. The the powers that be in politics have been told by the AG, this can't happen. So it doesn't happen. But instead it does happen, and then we are faced with, trying to see, and discuss, and it's a long road to try to change things once that the officialdom has set it in motion.
It is a long road, and that I think is some. To all these issues, Niresh, as to why is the Attorney General here? Why does the media work like this? And all of that is also. We constitutionally, the executive presidency, the existence of the executive president from 1978, the manner in which the executive presidency has been able to completely reshape and use the executive, the public service to serve the executive and not the people. We also lost. We had so those years set a lot of precedents and many ways of doing things, and some of these actions went up to court, and courts also unfortunately gave judgments that sort of supported some of these decisions, etc. And so the result is that we have what we have here, and so it will take a long time. I'll give you one example that I'm familiar with. For example, MPs crossing over. That's a big problem we have. That's a problem we had. And the reason for that was MPs were being bought over and MPs were crossing over. And the Supreme Court said, you can cross over. And impose a huge burden on the political party to discharge before they can throw an MP out. And it was impossible. Every time it takes years, and so no political party was able to get anyone thrown out, even though they just blatantly went and crossed over. So we are a political party, and the UNP suffered the most because of that. The UNP decides to field Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe as a candidate. The members go and stand on the stage and support Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. UNP can't do anything. They can't throw, but the next day morning they come and sit in parliament in the UNP benches.
And of course we had situations there where we had a foreign passport holder who became a state minister after crossing over.
Yeah, but now we are fortunate, right, with the Supreme Court has now changed that. So it's a long journey, and then of course we had to go through this. This obviously it's these things that led to the Desiya Visipahama Epa, right, and then a mood shift. And then the Supreme Court thereafter started delivering judgment after judgment after judgment, saying that no, you cross over, you're out. You cross over, you're out, and saw it for what it actually was. That this guy actually breached his promise to his party and promise to his electorate. And so then we saw this spate of expulsions actually being upheld. And now we have and this is the kind of transformation that we need to talk about. So even in the case of the recent conviction, Anasara Thero's conviction, when these statements when he was going on a rampage as a Muslim community, I was a Muslim community lawyer, the community was at a loss. What do we do to this? So initial response was just forget about, just keep quiet, ignore him, it will blow away. Right? But of course, I was out the way, no, it's not going to blow away, it's going to be here forever. We need to fight this. So we started making complaint after complaint after complaint, 1, 2, 3, 50, 60, 70,
But
80.
again, the onus should not be on the victims.
But that's how we change society, right? We all have a part to play.
Right.
We all have a part to play, and we start putting pressure, and then at least even 8 years later, he got 9 months. But that's
8 years.
8 years later, it's 9 months, but that's still an improvement.
Well, justice delayed is justice denied. We need to take a short commercial break right now. We are in conversation with Hejaaz Hizbullah, attorney at law. We'll be right back.
ඒගොල්ලන්ට මේ අපිට කියන්න බෑනේ මේ අනේ හාල් ටික හොයලා දෙන්න කියලා.
අහන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි උත්තර දෙන්න. ඔබතුමාත් අහපු ප්‍රශ්නෙට. ඌ බලාපොරොත්තු කන්දක් දීලානේ ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ.
සදාකාලිකව ඒගොල්ලන්ට කොරාය කිඹුල්ලු බල ඉන්න පුළුවන්.
ජනතාව බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම ශනික යම්කි සහනයක්.
දැනට තියෙන රජයයි ඒ තිබිච්ච රජයන අතර අහසට පොළොව වගේ වෙනසක් තියෙනවා.
මොකද අපි දැක්ක මීට පෙරත් ඔය ජවනිකාව අපි දැක්ක ඔය නාට්‍ය අපි දැක්කා.
කලබල වෙන්න එපා රොෂාන්. අපි ඔය වගේ ප්‍රශ්න කරන්න ආචාර්ය උපාධි සහතික නැතුණා කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්.
අත එක පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් කරන්න වස්ස ඔබට තීරණය කරන්න පුළුවන්.
අපි හැමෝම එකතු වෙලා මේ රට හදමු.
දවස සතිය දිනවල සවස 6:30ට.
This is where dreams take flight, where stars are born, and the future of international cricket shines the brightest.
She is setting the stage alight.
16 nations will compete for World Cup glory in Malaysia.
She is putting on a show here.
And they are champions.
The ICC Under-19 Women's T20 World Cup 2025 begins January 18 on TV1.
මේ වසන්තේ මේ ආරාධනය විසේකාර දඟකාර හැඩකාර කුමාරයන්ට සහ කෝල කොමල මනලෝල කුමාරියන්ටයි මේ වසන්තේ සිරස වසන්ත කුමරා සහ කුමරිය ලෙස කිරුළු පලදින්න දැන්ම සැරසෙන්න වයස අවුරුදු 18ත් 25ත් අතර කුමාරයන් සහ කුමාරියන් මෑතකදී ගත් ඡායාරූපයක් සමග පෙබරවාරි 20 වෙනිදාට පෙර අයදුම් කරන්න. ලිපිනය නිෂ්පාදක සිරස වසන්ත කුමරා සහ කුමරිය ස්ටයින් ස්ටුඩියෝ බොරුපන පාර රත්මලාන. පිවිසෙන්න අවුරුදු.sirasatv.lk.
Welcome back to Face to Face. We are in conversation with Mr. Hejaaz Hizbullah, attorney at law. And now, Hejaaz, we were talking about the manner in which some people are able to get away with hate speech and nothing is done. And, these people are untouchable because the governments in power have made them untouchable. And this has gone on through several regimes. I mean, it wasn't the Rajapaksas who invented this. It was there in previous regimes as well, these untouchable people. And, they could get away with murder, they could get away with hate speech, and nothing was done. The government simply said nothing, did nothing. Police didn't do anything. And in the end, the affected parties or communities had to try to fight it out through, going to court, going and making complaints in police stations, public opinion, going all the way to the UN sometimes. This is not the way the law should be administered. So how do we correct this? It shouldn't be up to the citizens. It should be up to the legal apparatus.
Again, a difficult question as to in a functioning in a legal system that functions well. A citizen should not be the one who's doing the legwork in getting.
But is Sri Lanka so dysfunctional where the law is concerned?
I think so. It's. I mean, as you say, it looks so. I mean, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. I mean, day in day out, we see people the amount to which they struggle to get justice. From just someone who's had something stolen, a theft in his house. Does anyone who has had his house burglared move about with the confidence that yes, the police will come, arrest the guy, put him, produce him before court, and I'll get my things. Does anyone have any such confidence about that? Nobody. It's an illusion.
I would put it to you, Hejaaz, that the reverse is true, because when your house is burgled or you are assaulted on the street or whatever, then you think twice about going to the police, because
precisely
because you know it's that guy who's done this, and the police won't act against him. And once you make the complaint, that guy and his cronies will come after you again, and the police aren't going to protect you. There is no OIC sitting the guy down and saying, don't go anywhere near this the victim or the victim's house. You might get your vehicle windscreen smashed, or so many things can happen. So it works the other way, doesn't it?
Precisely, and also the fact that if you do choose that, no, I need to do this and I want to get this done, it's a very, very long journey. A long journey with many twists and turns and risks that you take, and so that's how the system that's a system we have, and there's a lot of changes that we need to bring in to the system, but that is the system we have, and that a system of that nature, then is a perfect condition for inequality, for abuse, for manipulation, for harassment. And the thing that we always say is that the process is the punishment. Yes, you just need to take a man and just throw him into the process. He will spend the next 10 to 15 years fighting himself, fighting through the maze and figuring things out and coming out. That will take another 15 years for him. But that's it. We've achieved what we want to achieve. We've given him a thorough punishment. Although at the end of it, he might come out a victor, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. What did he win? Nothing. He wasted 15 years of his life trying to prove his innocence or that he was right.
So let's look at an example. Singapore. If anyone in Singapore, whether foreigner or a Singaporean, says anything which amounts to hate speech, well, if you say anything about the Muslims or the Buddhists or the Christians, whoever, you're going to get locked up. No one has to go and make a complaint to the police. You're going to get locked up because you've said it, and if you've said it in a public sphere, like online or on TV, I mean, it's there, and the government will act. Why don't we ever do that? We still have this weird situation where police don't act unless they have a complaint. And it's ridiculous, because according to the law, the police don't need a complaint. They can act. They are supposed to act. They are not supposed to wait for somebody to come and complain before they act.
So in Singapore, from what I see, from Singapore, they have an idea about the country that they want to live in. They have an idea, everybody, and that idea is shared by the Chinese, by the Indians, and by the Malays, and every single community that is living there shares and buys into that idea, and it's an idea that they also can participate in. So then they contribute to it. So I could be a police officer who's of an X identity, ethnicity, who sees a person of my own ethnicity and identity engaging in hate speech against Y. But what I do see is that speech, although it's from one of our guys saying it to them, it still hurts the idea of the country that I want to live in. So then I am quick to act on that. And that kind of understanding is not there in Sri Lanka.
So it boils down to patriotism, doesn't it? I mean, Singaporeans are fiercely patriotic. You never hear of Singaporeans even migrating to the West. They just live in Singapore. They're proud of their country. which, it's a new country. It's not this 2,500-year-old country that we have. But in Sri Lanka, we're not very proud of our country. We're not patriotic.
I think Sri Lankans, if you talk to Sri Lankans and if you see how they go about it, of course, this is not my area. I'm not a sociologist or anthropologist or whatever the species.
But this comes down to the crux of applying the law unequally.
So, but that patriotism is also a bit shallow and empty, and also again identity-based. What is to be a Sri Lankan is also identity-based.
Exactly. So people identify not as so much as Sri Lankans, but with their community. And it goes very deep. I mean, are you from the south? Are you from Kandy? Are you an estate community person from Nuwara or from Badulla? I mean, it's mind-boggling. But this identity of Sri Lankan, I am a Sri Lankan, doesn't seem to work.
And I think that is something, that's like that's I think at the bottom of a lot of our problems. And the law enforcement gets infected by these differences, and we do not have the supervisory mechanisms also that are uninfected. The healthy ones, we do not have that. Even those are infected. So then we have, there's no way of correcting. So we need to get, at some point, some healthy institutions that are independent, that can see beyond these differences and start putting in those good principles and ideas and attitudes and the culture. Then we can start seeing, and of course that then boils down to the constitutional and constitutional institutions. Executive presidency, as we have always said, is a problem, and reducing those powers is certainly and bringing some balance to our constitutional structure in the independence of the public service is very, very important if we are to change these approaches.
Now, Hejaaz, let me frame this in a different way. Why is it that we take so long, that our governments, successive governments and parliament, they take so long to do the simplest things? It's mind-boggling. Let's take the executive presidency. We've been talking about abolishing it for 30 years. Half of our population weren't even born when this debate began. And it's not a debate. Everybody agrees it has to go, but it doesn't go. And I don't know whether it'll be thrown out under this administration even. But that's an entire constitution. But let's take an easier example. Right, the death penalty. Now, we don't execute people in Sri Lanka. The last person to be executed was, I think, in 1976. So we don't do it. But the law continues to be on the books. And we have literally hundreds of people convicted and living on death row. And that's ridiculous. I mean, if we're not going to execute people, and certainly I do not want the death penalty implemented at all on anyone, why do we have it at all? I mean, it's so simple. Just repeal that law.
I think we have a good justice minister, Sirasa, who is a lawyer, who has practiced as a lawyer, who worked as a defense counsel. I'm sure, I hope he's watching this show, and I think he should take the initiative. And these are things that, as you're absolutely correct, it's not a law that has been implemented, and then why are we having it? So, yes, these are things that the government can do.
And also beyond that, if you have a law which everybody is ignoring, just because, okay, no government is going to apply it, so we ignore that. But then that breeds contempt for all laws, doesn't it? I mean, why? Okay, if the government doesn't care about that law, well, why should we care about other laws? So, you're making justice, the whole justice.
It brings in certain inefficiencies.
Exactly.
You're right. I would agree with you on that.
Right. And then the strange thing is that when there is an election, all political parties come up with, yes, we'll get rid of the PTA, we'll get rid of the executive presidency, but then afterwards it all dies down. Even the opposition seems to forget that these things were promised and need to be done.
Yes, that unfortunately is the situation in our country. But of course, things are slightly different now, in the sense that we have a single party
with 159 seat majority,
with a majority, with the adequate majority. So the excuses that we have heard in the past, the inability to get consensus, does not really apply, because it's their party. It's not going to be too difficult to get their 150 MPs to agree on something. So I'm sure this government, if at all a government can abolish the executive presidency, then this is that government, because they have the numbers to do it, and they don't need to get into deals with anybody to get the majority. So certainly it's up to them.
Well, at the same time, it's early days. This government is very young, but we haven't seen a lot of progress in the direction of repealing some of these laws, and certainly not the executive presidency, which is, obviously you need a whole new constitution for that, so that would take a long time. But some of these other laws should be repealed much faster, don't you think? How long does it actually take to draft a bill?
Well, certainly a bill to repeal a law would, I think, at the most take 10 minutes, right?
Exactly.
If that is if just a law to take, if just to draft a bill to repeal a law is just a 10-minute thing. The whole parliamentary process might be just 2 to 3 months, 2 or 3 sessions of parliament, and I think you'll be able to get over that.
And now you don't even need a vote in parliament. It's just,
yes,
everything just goes through.
Yeah. But I think now, for example, talking about the PTA, we heard the minister speaking of repealing the PTA and bringing a new act.
But that doesn't make sense to me. The PTA, which came in, 1979, as a
yes,
temporary measure because of an emergency situation in the country. Now that emergency situation is simply not there. So we don't need the PTA. We don't need anything else like the PTA. And when you get into trying to repeal something and replace it with something else, Hejaaz, you're going to start cherry picking and say, no, we'll keep that part of it, we'll keep this section. And in the end, you end up with most of that old law, the act. And you might add on some more. In fact, we saw this with the previous regime, where, the bill that they tried to bring before Parliament was far worse, in the opinion of many legal scholars, than the PTA itself. So what's that about? Yes, repeal the PTA, and later on, if you need something else, if our other laws are insufficient, bring something else, but don't sort of try to, this isn't like selling a car and buying a new one. The car is useless. Get rid of it. That's it. Think about the rest later.
You're right, Nilesh. I entirely agree with you. And we've got used to the idea that we need a terror law, right? And so it's like, it's like now we suddenly feel if there was no terror law, we'll be a target country for terrorism, which I think that argument
don't we
is...
have enough other laws?
Yes,
I mean,
we do.
Look at our penal code. It's a book. You can't spit on the street. You can get locked up, basically. I mean,
we have the public security ordinance, and we have the emergency and the power of the president to promulgate emergency regulations under that law. And the complaint against the emergency regulations is the fact that every month you need to get it approved in Parliament. But as I've always stated, if the emergency is genuine and real and sincere, and the regulations are focused on a particular target group, then getting a parliamentary majority, even in a parliament that is hung parliament, where the government is not in majority, will not be difficult. So we had during the war, we had hung parliaments. We had parliaments without majorities, but they managed to pass the emergency regulations
because there was
a problem. There was a problem.
Yeah.
The public consensus was there. So that should not. I don't think that is a problem at all. Emergency regulations, the fact that we need a law to face an emergency, and that we'll be caught in a situation of an emergency without a law cannot be accepted, because we do have the public security ordinance where you can kick in these provisions. So we don't need, so we need to, so the argument for a sitting or a permanent terror law is no longer there. And I also want to anyone who wants to talk about this and think about this, go back to when it originally came. When it originally came was when armed groups were operating in the north and east, and even then it was temporary.
Exactly.
So when there were armed groups operating and Alfred Durayappa, the mayor of Jaffna, was assassinated, the government brought in a temporary law. So the government at that time, the J.R. Jawahar government, was also more humanist and more human rights focused then, since then, the governments now, because now we don't have armed groups operating, but we are insisting that we want a terror law. The terrorism. So I was in the Supreme Court when the anti-terrorism bill was being argued. I think it went on for one week. The five-judge bench heard it. And so we had justifications for the need for terror laws, but all those justifications came from foreign countries. Foreign countries that are in the business of bombing other countries. Now, we don't do that. We don't have enemies. We don't. I mean, thankfully, we don't. We don't go
interfering in other
countries. So there are no threats from outside. It's if at all the threat from inside, and those threats are also rooted in rule of law, justice, human rights issues.
Exactly. Well, I'm afraid we are out of time, but basically there needs to be a lot more discourse on matters which affect the citizens of this country because of the misapplication of our laws. And of course we will continue to speak on these matters, as we always do at Newsfirst. Hejaaz, any final thoughts on this?
Well, at least I hope we have the government that is in power is a government that has the requisite parliamentary majority.
And has made all the promises.
And also has the people who are aware of these arguments, who are aware of the issues, who are sympathetic to these causes, because repeal PTA is not something strange to the people, the members of the in parliament and in government at the moment, because they've also been participants at these events, meetings and petitions and debates and arguments. In fact, they have been at the front line also. So certainly, like everything, there is a change that is expected, and I hope there will be a serious change, particularly with regard to law and order and justice.
Hejaaz Hizbullah, Attorney at Law, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I'm afraid that's it for tonight from Face to Face. Don't go away, because the news is coming up next, as always. Have a good evening.